Welcome back. Now Frank will walk us through the various steps involved in texturing lifelike details in fur. In this tutorial, he'll be using an elk and a lynx for illustration, and later he'll apply these same techniques to the cottontail rabbit.
I want to talk about not only the bits to use, but the methods to apply the texturing of fur. First, we're going to use the inverted cone, or you can use a cylinder, which I'll show you in a while. The higher the speed, the smoother the cut. So with this particular machine, if you're using it on with a foot control, which you should for safety, use this particular machine with a foot control. Have it depressed all the way so that you've got full 18,000 RPMs. The rules, if you take nothing more away from what I'm about to say, remember these rules for texturing hair. Texture from the bottom up and from the rear forward. You have to do that in order to indicate the hair that lies underneath first, then the hair that lays on top of that, on top of that, on top of that. If you start from the front and work to the rear, you're going to get a lot of hairs that look like they're growing straight up the back and out of the back, or the legs, or wherever you're doing. Follow the direction of flow lines. Now if you look at this elk, I've put flow lines on him, and this will allow me not only to get what I consider a graceful flow to the hair into the cape that I've already done, but it will allow me to not be going off in a wrong direction when I want to join back into this area or join back into the hip or the flank area. I want to use a stroke that fits the size of the carving that I'm doing. By that I mean carve to scale. When I first started carving, I was so proud of a white-tailed deer that I had done, and I was at a show, and a good friend of mine was there, also one that hunted with me. We hunted together for years, and I was so proud. I said, "Jim, what do you think of this particular deer?" And he looked at it and he says, "Really good carving." He said, "But it seems to me," now here was a man that wasn't a carver, he said, "it seems to me if that was a real deer, the hair would be about 2 feet in diameter." And I took a look, and in my haste to get that carving done, I had used a large stone and I had just covered the whole thing with non-scale hair. So I went home and sanded off all the paint and sanded it all down and started again. And it was a good lesson from a non-carver even. I use back and forth strokes when I'm texturing. By that I mean a stroke that I cut in with, and I'm cutting toward myself, but as I go back to re-register, I cut on that direction, so that you get, actually when I'm texturing, you'll hear this zick, 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 zick like this. And you'll see more of that later as I'm texturing. I use random stroke lengths. Don't try to make a big long stroke here and then a couple short ones. What I do by random, I'll go maybe a 1/4 inch for a while, and then I might get a little shorter, I might even get a little longer. And that's just the way the hairs and fur on an animal are. The hairs are constantly being replaced. And as a result, not only do they have finer looking hair, but they'll have longer hair because of losing it or rubbing it off or whatever. I overlap my stroke rows by about 1/3 of the length of each stroke. And I use undulating overlapping rows. By that, when I undulate, I'll start, and just like a sine wave, I'll go up and down, and then the next one it might go the other way, only because I want a random textured look to the hair, just as it is on the real animal. I try to work S-curves, modified S-curves into all my carvings, and the modified S is probably the most graceful shape in nature, and you find it not only in hair, but you find it even in feathers on birds. Do a little of this, like here, for example, is a modified S. I started here, it's coming down here, and it's going to go here. It'll actually go underneath the stomach like that, so that I have this S curve. That is far, far more pleasing than a lot of short, strokey little lines that are straight as an arrow and also unnatural. Consider the areas where we discussed before of coarse hair. Now this is where, for example, when this elk moves his leg against the neck hair, right in here is going to be an area of coarse hair. So I'll carve that in usually first. You may be able to see a little bit of it here. I'll turn on my light so you can just see where I've started that. See? This is going to be an area of coarse hair, and I'll work it up through here. Just as the mane and the neck hair is coarse. And later on we'll be talking about hair splits, but these hair splits on an elk don't occur as often as they would on a longer haired animal, such as this lynx. Now the lynx will have hair splits because in this area there's a lot of coarse hair. So this hair, when he moves, will pressure formed here will actually cause this hair and this hair to separate, and these hairs here will pop out of that. And this is accomplished by just taking a pencil, drawing an inverted Y in the areas that you want these, and I'll demonstrate this later. You can see the inverted Y right here, and then I take a small diamond flame, make a plunge cut by pushing the tip of the bit in and dragging it out and actually outlining up and down both ways that Y. Then I'll roll it so it looks like hair is popping out from the split, and the split then continues on its way by closing above this separation. We can cover that later on, but it's very easily done. I caution you not to put too many of these in a given animal because it's distracting to the carving overall. Now we'll start texturing the elk just to show you the strokes, and that should be sufficient to serve you until you get into the rabbit texturing section. When I begin my texturing, normally I would start down in the hocks, in the hock area, and work my way up the leg, but I'd just like to show you in this area, and out of sequence, of course, because I'm working not from the bottom up, I'm about halfway, but I just want to show you the method of stroking that I use. Again, it's important for me to have a fairly harsh light to my left because I'm right-handed. And you'll see as I'm starting these strokes, again, I'm doing a cut forward and a cut to the rear. And I'm texturing out, and I'm beginning to undulate that row. See how it's coming up now? And it comes down. And now when I do the next one, I'll actually start, and you notice I'm overlapping it by about a third, that same row. And notice how I'm following my flow lines. If the flow line begins to bend to the right, then my strokes will begin to bend to the right. If it bends radically to the right, then I'll work my way slowly into that radical bend before I actually execute the bend. Now you see here, my stroke is following this direction because my flow lines dictate that. I'm beginning to straighten out here because the flow lines straighten out here, and as long as I meet them, don't cut big long strokes in there where the flow lines are. Those are merely guidelines. Now I've done just one little section here just to show you how I've followed the flow lines and how the strokes have gone back and forth, and little rows of strokes that overlap by a third. And hopefully you can see the shadow line from the lamp that will show you what I've done there. And then I'm going to just bring it down to the same area so you can see the same application on the neck where I've done this grinding just to show the coarseness of the hair, where the hair is getting finer and finer as I go up onto the top of the head to the extremely fine hair on the nose. To give you an idea of how I cut in hair separations and using what I call the upside down Y method, I'll put another one in this cat. I can use, in this lynx rather, I can use this area right here, and I will draw along this line, and then I will come down and make a split there. And even drawn as a pencil, with a pencil, you can see what's going to happen there and how it's going to give more life to this particular part of the hair. So I will just cut that in now, and I'm going to use a small flame-shaped diamond bit, 3/32 shank, and I'm just going to use a drag stroke, and I'll cut it in by plunging first and then following that line down, and then plunging back in that same hole and dragging along the pencil line that I made, and then coming up to the top and dragging down into the plunge cut that I made to begin with. So now I've got that pretty much the way I want it. I'll just roll that to make it look like that hair is coming out of there from between the upper hairs that have split apart, and then I'll just texture this upwards by shaping it first, and then I'll texture it afterwards rather. There. Now that inverted Y that I'm using as a split has been textured, it's all ready to clean, and any other areas that I have to finish, I'll finish up, and then I'll clean this whole area with a soft brush. After I'm done texturing this animal, I want to be sure that I clean it. I will use a rotary brush, a soft bristled rotary brush. The reason I want to be sure this is clean, that when I'm ready to seal it, I don't want to trap any of the little particles of dust that were generated while I was texturing and are all over the body, although I can't see most of them. So I will follow the direction of my texturing and using a slow speed so I don't wipe out any of the texturing. And you can actually see from the shine how clean this is getting. And you need to do that, because if you trap a lot of these particles in there, when you seal it, then it's going to be like a little pimple sticking up. And when you paint it, you're going to paint over that pimple, and it's going to act as a dam that will dam up paint. And as you go, and if you want to see the truth, and I say that in a biblical way, if you want to see the truth of what you've done, take it out into the morning sun and hold it up and look at it. And that morning sun never lies. Now, based on the flow of hair that I see on my reference photos, I'm going to start drawing in how I want this hair to run. Now, these are not strokes that are accomplished with the texturing bit. These are just images, for example, to give me an idea how I want to texture this, the direction I want to texture it. Now, I don't like this particular line or this sequence right here, so I'll get rid of it. I always say that the most important tool for any wood carver is a pencil. And the next most important tool is that little rubber thing at the end of that pencil. Don't be afraid to use it. If you hold a carving at arm's length when you've drawn something on it and it doesn't look right to you, then get rid of it. Now I'm going to continue drawing these in, and then I'll start texturing, but I'll show you the texturing sequence beginning with what I have drawn here. In just a minute, I'll draw a few more. And we change directions as we come up the back. Now when you texture, don't follow these with great big long cutting lines. You texture with a back and forth motion, and as I covered in the texturing sequence on this CD, just follow those guidelines and you can texture virtually anything, whether it be animal, bird, or human. Before you start texturing, you should always have a strong light to the left if you're a right-hander and to the right if you're a left-hander. The reason for this is that the light will cast shadows on what you've already done and allow you, as you go, to register stroke after stroke close enough to one another to resemble hair. So let's start texturing. Notice I'm cutting forward and back. I cut on the outstroke, I cut on the instroke. And I am also following the flow lines that I drew on there. And again, you start at the bottom, you work up, you start at the rear and work forward. Just as we did in the earlier hair texturing sequence. Now I have finished texturing the entire animal. I'm pretty well satisfied with everything I see. I have coarse areas of hair and I have finer areas of hair, and I've relieved away some hair splits in there, and the paws are all shaped. At this point I consider this pretty well finished and ready to paint. Now we won't be painting on the CD because it's primarily for a carving CD. I would rather show you the techniques used for carving than those for painting. You refer to your references and you can pull the painting colors that you need and apply them. Now please take your time and make this an enjoyable experience. If it gets to be too much, where you feel stressed over what you're doing, walk away from it for a few hours or a few minutes or the length of a cup of coffee, whatever it takes, but make sure you enjoy all the time you spend in your creation. Now we're going to move on to our next project, which is the Mallard Drake Duck. I have used and gathered all the reference photos, folders, and drawings that I need, and from these I've made my working drawings on which I've put all the details that I need, the top view, side view, even a cutaway view, and under bill detail, under tail detail. Now from this I can go ahead and make my patterns. I glued the working drawing to a poster board, then I cut them out with a razor knife, and I ended up with a separate pattern for the head and a separate pattern for the body. It's much easier to work even this size duck, which is a half scale, by having a separate head. That way when I want to carve underneath, I can carve the under bill detail without being restricted with the body being flopping all around, which I'll show you in a minute. I've outlined my templates on both the top and side of my block, and I did the same thing with the head, and I've already cut the head out. I paused here before I cut this out on the bandsaw only to mention that if you don't own a bandsaw, you can accomplish cutting this out with a jigsaw, with a hand scroll saw, or even a saber saw with a long enough bit. That's the top view that I'm addressing now. Since this particular piece is about 4 inches wide, it would be difficult to do this, so you'll have to carve this out once you establish the top view cut. All right, I've cut out the carving blank on the bandsaw, both the head and body blanks. I've put my center line around the head. I'm just finishing up putting the center line, you can call it center line or reference line, whichever. Remember, what it does is help you maintain symmetry from side to side on your carving. Now I'm going to start laying out those areas that I'm going to waste away when I start doing my rough shaping. I know I want to come up this far before I start to roll down this far into the side pockets. Now these, you can call these flanks or side pockets. Most people call them side pockets because they are actually pockets. When this duck lands on the water, these pockets open up and he folds his wings. And as you see in the picture, or you can see in the picture after, he tucks his folded wing into this flap of skin and feathers. That's why this is a very prominent line on the side of a duck, and you want to keep it at all times when you have a duck that's at rest on the water or on the mantelpiece for that matter. I have seen taxidermists that have actually mounted ducks like this with the wings outside the side pockets, and they look terrible. So I'll continue doing this, and I'll start cross hatching where I know I'm going to be removing wood, and I'll finish up in just a second here. Now I've finished cross-hatching and outlining all those areas where I'm going to be wasting away wood on this duck. He'll look relatively square when I start, but that's fine. It's easier to work from a square to the round than try to get around immediately on both sides. You can see that I'm going to be taking some out under the tail. Then I'll define the undertail coverts. Right in this area here are the curly tail coverts, the upper ones, and the tail itself. And then I'm going to use crossed wings, just as I've drawn on my working drawings and also on the template. I've got to remove some around the head, and it'll begin to define, around the neck area. It'll begin to define the whole body, and then I'll do the head as well, and you can see those areas that I'm going to be removing. Not as much by any means, so I won't use quite as aggressive a bit as I would be on the body, where I can remove a lot more at once. So we'll begin removing stock here, and allow me to get set up, and we'll move right into that area. These are the two bits that I'll be using to cut out both, or to begin rough shaping both the body and the head. I'll be using the large 1/4 inch shafted cylinder, and I'll be using the smaller 1/8 shafted flame shape. Now that's going to allow me to make every cut I need for both the body and the head. So we'll get started with that. And I'll put the hand piece on, and I've got to initiate my dust collector again, so it's going to be a little noisy. I'll begin roughing out. Just as a reminder, you'll want to make sure that you maintain touch with the carving as you go with your thumb rather than trying to keep it out. Because see where my fingers are? That's an easy place to be cut if I lose control. This way, not only am I close to the bit for control, but I know I'm not going to lose it back where my fingers are actually acting as a vise. So I'll cut this out here, and I'll continue cutting this out. Now I've finished rough carving, and I've pretty much wasted away all the major areas where I don't want stock. I'm ready to start defining the major contours and feather groups of the duck. Okay, now I've defined the major areas of the duck: the wings, the curly coverts, the tail, the side pockets, the major back feather groups, the cape, and I have begun to define the contours of the head. I've put in parts of the jowl, the beak, the whole cheek, and the eye valley. Everything I've wasted away so far has been accomplished with the large Typhoon cylinder, and the refining cuts with regard to the heavier or bigger details now have been done with the 1/8 flame shape. And you can see where I have cut in the side pockets, where I've cut in using a drag stroke most of the time to define the outline, and then wasting away with wiping strokes all the other details. You might notice here you see some cross hatching. As I sighted down here, this side is higher than this side. So I haven't gotten to it yet. Whenever I see something like that, I take my pencil and I draw cross hatches on it, because I know that has to be removed, and it won't be removed. The cross hatching won't go away unless I physically remove it. I have my wing feathers, the wingtips, the crossed wingtips are drawn in, and I've defined the curly coverts again. And the head I've added a bit more detail to on both sides. And I'll begin working in this area, and then we'll begin to smooth the entire duck down and get ready to draw feathers. I've already joined the head to the body, and I use a screw so that until I get the head totally textured and exactly the way I want it shaped with my carving tools, I can take it off and put it on at will by just loosening this screw. I've done this so many times where I've had to put a screw through the body into a head, or even to the area where on some animals I've wanted to screw the body parts together just to see how I was going to carve them and shape them, that I had a friend of mine take a regular drill bit and grind the end so that I could come in through the bottom of the body of the duck, drill that and go into the head, so that I can now set a screw, it's in there, and I have a perfectly drilled hole to do that. Now, it isn't necessary that you have a specialized drill like this made. You can accomplish the same thing by using two drills. First, using the smaller one that is slightly smaller than the threads on the screw, and then using a larger one following into the same hole for a ways that will allow you to sink the head of the screw. It's just that I get lazier as I get older. Okay, I've defined all the major areas, all the feather groups that I want to show on my carving. And now I'm going to start drawing in the feather groups, and I will use the same method I use on all of my birds. All of the hard flight feathers, the working feathers that sustain flight, I'll wood burn them. They're all in this area. And all the soft contour feathers I'll use a stone to texture them. And the head, I've defined the cheek to the extent that I want it, the jowl, the jowl and the cheek. You can see the eye valley is in here. When you establish the eye on a duck, it's very, very close if you use the thickness of the bill and swing it up into the eye valley, and this would be just about where the eye falls. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. I'll register that. And remembering that feathers on a bird are smaller at the tail, and as you work forward, the soft feathers, the contour feathers, they get larger, larger, larger in the middle, get quite large on the breast, but not the largest feathers are in the middle, then the breast, and it gets smaller, smaller, smaller as we go to the head. And I'll be using my working drawings to accomplish any of the sized feathers, because I know they work. They fit the drawing and they fit the scale of the carving, so I'll use those. So I'm going to go away for a minute and I'll put in the eyes. I'm going to get the feathers established and textured. I'll cut these in, and I've started to define the bill underneath and on top. You see the feathers from the neck run out into a point on the feather, on the bill rather, and I will define the separation of the bill, the nail of the bill, and the nail being what the baby duck works his way out of the egg with. That's why it's called a nail or an egg nail. And then I'll set the eyes once I have the head textured. This follows very, very closely what we did on the rabbit initially as far as sequences and texturing. And I'll leave you now. I'm going to start drawing these feathers in, and when we come back, when we get back together again, I'll have most all of this done and we'll talk a little bit more about it. So I'll start my feathers. I'm holding a casting of a mallard's beak, a full-sized mallard. I certainly wouldn't carve it this size for a carving this size, but it gives me all the detail, where the feathers end, where the bill bracing and even the teeth that line these for puddle ducks. It's like a little sieve in there that they use. The nostrils, and everything is there. These are available from any a wood carving vendor in just about any species of waterfowl, upland game bird, some of the birds of prey that you'd want. I use these. I have a collection of virtually every duck there is, and I used this to begin the layout and carving of the beak on this duck.
The following is a tutorial on texturing details into feathers using both rotary bits and wood-burning pens. In this segment, Frank uses a sharp shin hawk to demonstrate his techniques for creating realistic details on various feather groups. These steps will be applied to the final touches of the Mallard Drake Duck.
I'd like to show you the texturing of soft or contour feathers. I'm going to use a bird that I've already started and I've used for a demonstration bird all over. This is a sharp shin hawk that's extremely puffy because he, in late fall, seemed to be following me around the golf course, and every time I'd look up he'd be in a tree all puffed up just looking. and it was a cold, windy day, and I thought, what a neat bird to carve. So rather than make him a real slim bird, I've made him puffy because he's going to be in a cold, probably a winter scene when I'm done. Any birds that I carve, you will see a combination of texturing with a stone. And for texturing, we use an inverted cone stone or a cylinder shaped stone, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and a wood burner combination. Now, the reason for this, why I do it this way, is I want soft feathers for those areas that protect the bird, keep him warm. If he bumps into a bush or a tree, whatever, they're the soft feathers that contour the majority of his body. The flight feathers, for example, the tail feathers, which are called the rectices, the primaries, the secondaries, the tertials, some of the scapulars, I like to burn those in because they give me a harder look, as do those same feathers on a real bird that sustain flight. They are harder appearing to me on the bird and individually than are the contour feathers that again are more for warmth and form and protection. So let's get started. Again, this bird is one that I've used to demonstrate on various occasions, and I would just like to show you a continuation of that. I like to draw my feathers in and on the bird upside down. I just learned it that way, and I feel more comfortable doing that way because it's a more natural movement to the feathers. So this little area right here, I'll start drawing feathers in. And to me, as I said, this is a little more, it's a little more to the way my wrist moves naturally. And I'll just draw a couple here just to show you. Now, once I get my feathers in, I like to give them just a touch of life. And the only way I can do this, not only life, but direction, then I'll turn the bird back around and I'll begin to put these flow lines in. These are not quills. These are just indicators that show me how I want this bird's feathers to go when I'm texturing them. Because these particular feathers, no quill shows anyway. The quill is way back underneath. And these all look like they're the barbules sticking off the quills. So I've drawn my feathers. Now I'm ready to relieve them away. Now, any bird that you are carving, keep in mind the fact that the contour feathers, where they start in with the undertail coverts, are actually smaller, and as you go along the bird's body, into the flanks, into the breast, they get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and when you get to the top of the breast, they begin to get gradually smaller, smaller, and smaller. So you go from small to large to small, always within the same bird. Now, I like to, these soft feathers, I like to relieve them away even further than I do the feathers that I'll show you later when we're wood burning, only because by raising them away, they get a softer, puffier look. And on this particular bird, I want that. Now, this raising away situation and forming feathers, whether they're compressed or raised away, and again, how far you want them depends on the depth of your cut. On this particular one, I want this fairly smooth in here, so I'm just going to do it lightly. This is a three-step approach. You first, with the tip and the bit that I'm going to use, hopefully you can see it, it's a fluted steel burr, and this is a tapered burr. Referring back to the three steps, first I will outline with the tip of the bit. I will outline each feather that I want to raise away. Then the second step is to relieve away below each feather. And then the third step is to round the feather up to the next feather. Now, I need to show you the way that feathers lay, and I'll talk to you on the board about that. Before we begin carving the feathers, and relieving them away from the bird, I'd like to talk with you about the feathers themselves and how they lay on the bird. Unfortunately, with a lot of beginning carvers, when I'm judging, I can tell a beginning carved bird across the room just from the way that the beginner cuts his feathers in. We've all been told that feathers shingle, one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other. That's true, but most of the beginners take this a little too literally and cut the edges of the feathers in a square so that, yes, they indeed look like shingles and really not all that much like feathers. Feathers roll one onto the other. If you hold a feather and were to cut it in half, it would have almost like a side view of a clamshell. And these feathers will roll one to the next on top of each other. And this area right here that I've drawn is what we have to show on our birds in order to make the birds look realistic. Now that we've talked about how feathers lay one to the other on the blackboard, I'll start cutting these feathers in. Now it doesn't make any difference, especially on birds, how you cut these feathers that you're relieving away in. So I'm just going to start with this area right here, which is the nape or the cape, and I'll outline those, and then I'll begin to form them. And this is fairly time consuming, so what I'll do is start them, and I'll do one or two feathers just to show you the shape, and then I'll come back to shaping them, and I'll shape a lot more. Now the first step to relieving away these soft contour feathers is to hold the handpiece in a high attitude and actually trace the feather line around. I'm going to have to get a little closer. Now I've started to relieve those feathers away, and they already look like they're popping out, and I've only done the first step. Now the second step will be to relieve below each feather. And I'll use the flat side of the bit in order to do this. See, now I didn't outline this one, so I'll have to go back to the tip of the bit and a high angle on my handpiece. And there's step 2, and you can see where I've cut in this area here to make the feather come up a little more. Now I'm going to step 3, and I'm actually going to round those feathers down into that clamshell shape that we were talking about on the blackboard. So I'll round the edges by again using the flat part of the bit. I'll round those feathers down. And now you can see those feathers begin to come into shape. I've taken my lines out as I carved them away, so now I'll just reestablish them like I did on these feathers up here, just so I can see where how and where individual feathers lay. And I want this motion to be turning down here because he's turned his head. And there's the relieving away and the shaping of feathers. Okay, now I've selected a couple groups of feathers here that I want to show you what I call pre-texturing. Now I use a ceram cut blue stone ball shape, and what I want to do is I want to get those nice little rolls that are in a natural feather, and I can accomplish this by using this particular stone. It's a beautiful stone, and I would recommend having a set of these in all sizes, in the flame shape, the inverted cone, the ball, and the cylinder, because when you're doing feather work, any one of those is an excellent choice for the particular process of texturing that you're doing. So I'll start by pre-texturing now, and I need to get some air. I'm going to go with this ball in the same direction that I want my barbules to flow when I do the fine texturing. So all I'm going to do is just cut back and forth like this. And not only will this be a guide when I'm texturing the barbules, but it also gives that nice realistic look to the feathers. Now you don't have to do this on all of them, but if you want a nice puffy looking feather, it'll certainly help by doing this pre-texturing operation. Yes, you can get by without doing it, but I just think it adds so much more to the bird to do it. Now, just to give you an idea of what I did, I'll leave the bird in the same position, and I'm going to turn a harsher light across that for you, just so you can see those light little marks I put in there with that ball bit. Now we're going to go on to the finished texturing of these feathers. Now I'm going to start texturing or finish texturing the bird by putting the barbules in. I'm using a small inverted cone for this particular size feather. You want to be careful the size of bit that you use so that you can get the texture mark that is to the scale of the bird or animal that you're texturing fur on. So I'll start, and I like to start with the bird, and a rule of thumb is always start from the bottom and work up, work from the rear and work forward. I've gone out of sequence here just to demonstrate and show you the strokes that I use. I cut on the inner stroke and the outer stroke, so I'm getting a sort of a zick, 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 zick. You see how I'm following pretty much those pre-texturing lines that I made with the ball, and it makes this so much easier. I need a little more speed. Remember, the higher the speed, the smoother the cut. The slower the speed, the more tendency it has to tear. Now I'll work this through, and then I'll come back and show you this area and other areas that I've textured. Now I've textured this area, finished textured it, put all the barbules in a few of these feathers just to show you, and they were done with a zigzag motion with the inverted cone as I showed you. I want to show you now the importance of having what we call a shadow light. You can see that I've textured through here, but as I'm texturing, I had to have this light on so that I could register the strokes of each out and in stroke of the barbules that I was texturing in, so I could register them in order to cut them properly. So, and I'll show you the difference with the light, without the light, and now with the light. See, that allows me to see every mark I've made on this bird. And this will apply whether you're texturing with a stone with a rotary bit, or if you are texturing with a wood burner. And if you take a look at where I've burned, and then if I turn it off, you see there's quite a difference there. You can see that not only the depth of the cut, which is important, that helps you control the depth of the cut, and it also helps you register each stroke so that you get a uniformity rather that you need to show the observer that that is indeed a feather. I want to start burn texturing the hard flight feathers on this particular bird. You'll be able to use this same technique later on when we carve the Mallard Drake. First of all, I want to relieve away using a large flame ruby carver those areas and those feather areas that I'm going to be working on. This particular area right here will be, I have to show that pretty much going under this set of feathers because this bird has his wings crossed. So I'll draw these feathers in now just to give me an idea. And when you do this, after you're done, hold the bird at arm's length and see if your eye agrees with what you've done at arm's length and if it looks uniform and it's what you want. If it isn't, then use an eraser, erase them and do it over again. I don't particularly care for this feather right here, so I'll just round it a little bit more. So now I'm ready to relieve the feathers away, and then I'm going to texture burn them. Now, years ago we used metal bits or stone bits and had to laboriously follow these lines all the way slowly with small strokes to raise the feathers away. Well, now we don't have to do that anymore because some good soul found that by using a wood burner he could raise these away, and I'll show you this wood burner. It has a bent, blunt tip, and if you can see it, I'll hold it against, it's bent right there. And this edge is blunt. It's not sharpened like a normal skew is. Now this is, you can buy these and bend them yourself. You can even buy the factory sharpened ones and dull them down to use it. But you need this blunt end, this flat end, when you outline these feathers. That's what actually raises this feather away. So I'll burn those in now, but before I burn them in, what I want to do is adjust my heat setting, not on what I'm carving, but on a separate piece of wood. I'll move this bird out of the way for a second, and then I'll start my burns. And that's just about where I want it. I like it a little darker than chocolate. Like very dark chocolate. Now remember, when you place your pen, that's when the pen is the hottest, and when you lift away, usually the resistance of the wood and the burn has caused it to cool a little bit. So I feel pretty secure about that, and this I'm using Tupelo both on the bird and this old scrap piece of Tupelo. So I feel pretty confident that that burn won't really burn into the wood too far and cause me to immediately adjust my heat. So we'll go ahead now and start burning our bird. And it's just a very simple matter of just touching. See, that was a little hotter than it had to be. And rolling that feather down. And the next one. See, I stopped to talk, and what happened was that feather, or that burner, heated more than it had to. So I'll just move right along with this. This wood actually seems a little softer than the piece that I practiced on, but those feathers are all right. The feathers tuck in and out like that. I'll make some a little thinner, some even a little whiter, just because I can. And I've cut those in. Now I'll shut my burner off because I want to show you what I've done here. And if you can look, if you could feel this, you'd see that these feathers felt like they were laying one on top of the other. And I'll do the same thing on all the hard-working feathers. I'll eventually do all of these. I'll do the primaries. I've already done underneath on the tail feather groups rather, and I'll be pretty well set to start burning with a skew. Now I burn with a skew, and I want to show you this. I'll go down to the tail because I'm at a convenient point there to start burning. I've already shown you using the ball bit to put little ridges in the feathers to make it look realistic. Well, the same thing applies now with the skew pen that I'm going to use. And if you look at this, it's not bent, it's straight, whereas the other one was bent to lay that out. I want to use this very sharp tip on the front here in order to make single stroked lines like those that you find right here on the bird. I'm going to start single stroke texturing the tail of this bird rather than go up where I started laying this out, just because it's easier for you to see the technique. First of all, I want to use the same method I did to check my heat. Now I'm just checking the strokes as the heat comes on to make sure it's going to give me not only the depth but kind of the color. Two things to look for when you're wood burning. If you can't feel any resistance, if it just seems to sink into the wood, you're burning too hot, so you're going to get a cut like this. If it's a light gold color and you really have to work at it, then it's too cold. You want to get something that seems to allow I don't know how to better describe it, but just to allow your pen, your burning pen, to slide when you're doing the feathers. You want to make every effort that you can to keep the strokes close together. The closer together, the better, especially in competition. It seems like they look, sometimes the competition is not so much the carving of the bird, but how tight they can get the texturing strokes. So I'm going to lay out a few. Now I've worked from the bottom up, so that in this particular tail feather group I'm at the top now, or the top feather, and I like to work around the tip this way and up by stacking the strokes one on top of the other, and then when I get down here I'll work this way and come back up by stacking the strokes in this manner. I'm just going to show you a few of the strokes on this side so that I can show you the technique. And if you'll notice, the pen is rolling in my hand, and I'll show you in a second. Now here are the strokes that I'm using, and I'm trying to get them close together. Normally I would brace this against my knee or against the table or something, but for the camera's sake I need to hold it out like this. There are the strokes that I've started. You can see how I'm stacking them. Now this is the motion that you want to learn to develop with this hand piece, with this burning pen, and that's this. As I went, I was rolling like this, and my finger is always in contact with the carving. The little finger was always here to act as a brace, which allows me to roll the stroke. The reason you want to roll the stroke is because feathers, the barbules, are not right straight, just straight stroked. The barbules curl slightly on both sides toward each other at the bottom. I just wanted to show you this. This is a piece of denim from an old pair of dungarees, and I've wrapped it around a block of wood and just stapled it in place. What this is used for, the denim is just coarse enough on here that I can clean off the carbon that builds up as I'm doing my wood burnings. I will know, because all of a sudden I'll begin to see little bits of carbon on the carving itself, and then if you look on the tip, you'll see where it's built up. So rather than waste the tip over a short period of time by filing it, I like to just periodically, as I'm wood burning, reach over and take this little block of denim, and with the pen on, I quickly move it from side to side as though I were stropping it, and you'll find that that is sufficient to keep that tip clean enough to continue without having to file the tip. I've completed the duck using all the techniques that I've shown you. I've burned in all the hard working feathers, the flight feathers, the tail feathers, the curly coverts, the wing feathers, those major tertials that a mallard has, and all the ones that I want to be shown as hard feathers. Then I've textured in all the undertail coverts, all the side pocket feathers, clear up and to the head, clear to the beak. Once I had all of that textured, and if you'll remember, this follows very closely the same techniques that we used on the cottontail rabbit previously. I set the eyes, and I modeled the eyelids in the same manner that we learned in the setting the eyes sequence. And then I used my reference bill, and you can see by comparing the reference bill to the carving, the underside of the carving bill, I used the same detail that I was able to gain from the reference bill, not only on the bottom to the sieves that are on the upper mandible, right up through to the nostrils. They were all cut in the same manner, and all I did was use a reduction formula to do that, and all that was a 1/2 scale. This being the full scale, this being the 1/2 scale. So there you have the completed duck. And I hope you enjoy carving it as much as I enjoyed carving it with you.
That concludes the second video. On the third and final one, Frank will carve the bass.